We think of Georgian Britain as the epitome of elegance, etiquette and restrained chaste romance. But is that the actual truth?
The Georgian period was the start of a sexual awakening in Britain.
This is the true story of how romance was actually big business.
Love didn't enter into it.
Wealthy men were expected to take mistresses. That was absolutely normal and part of the course.
Where for those with money, scandals dominated society.
It's a very wild, very frivolous, very devil-may-care, hedonistic period.
You were expected to get experience, in inverted commas.
Any hint of sexual impropriety or indiscretion will be viewed very, very dimly, unless you've got enough money that that doesn't actually matter.
We have a period of sexual exploration. We have pornography.
It was certainly a society of great extremes.
There was so much you could do if you were in the right position.
Under the Cyclopsa.
There were stories of satanic rituals.
They basically had orgies.
This was a time when marriage was for money.
You married who you were meant to marry.
Marriages were in fact a cynical combination of convenience and money.
When prostitution was applauded.
There were brothels all over the place.
It was open, it was celebrated.
You need to forget the idea that your ancestors were not having a lot of sex. They were absolutely at it like rabbits.
This is Sex and Sensibility. Chapter 1. Preparing for the season. Ah, my dear viewer, the season, a time when the fortunes of young men and women are made and lost. Women like this story's young debutante, a Miss Harding, whose father's hard-earned fortune rivals that of barons and dukes. But there is one thing he can't buy: respectability. And for that he has instructed his eldest son, Edward, to make sure that his daughter is married off to a gentleman with a title.
Quick kiss, quicker kiss, quickest kiss. Quarrelsome queen quaffed quickly and quietly.
Again.
If Mr. Harding cannot be a lord, he will make sure that by securing the right match for his daughter, his grandson will be. Tales from the season have been immortalised by the books of Jane Austen, sensationalised by Netflix's Bridgerton, and now, with the help of expert historians, we are going to separate fact from fiction of one of history's most romanticised periods.
When Parliament sits, about 200 peers of the realm all descend on London for this period, and that tends to be from autumn, before the roads become too wet and rainy to be able to pass in the winter, and it carries on until the early spring. With them come their daughters, their sons, their wives, and what's sometimes called the top 10,000 of English society.
The season was the period when young girls were introduced to society for the first time, and where they would hopefully meet young men.
And the purpose of that was that marriages were about alliances between families.
So if you were a debutante, you would arrive to enjoy a season in London, in town, and that would kind of be your introduction to the social scene of the aristocrats, and your best bet is to bag a rich husband.
But what if you were an aristocratic gent whose fortune was running dry, like our Mr. Philip Banfield? Caddish son of Lord Banfield, and set to inherit his father's title and lands, but thanks to his father's gambling debts, little else, as the family's money is fast running out. To carry on in the life he has become accustomed to, he needs to find a rich wife. For his plan to work, he must find a wealthy, innocent young girl and marry her before society discovers his coffers are almost empty.
Sometimes the landed gentry lived beyond their means. They needed to bring in money.
The young men would hope to find themselves a rich wife.
Marriage is so different in Georgian Britain. The idea that you marry because you love somebody, oh, we've fallen in love, that is actually a really new idea in the scope of human history, because you didn't get married because you love somebody, you idiot. You got married because it was a financial deal.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This chapter is about what went into preparing for the season, and that is very different for men and women.
Oh, there's an absolute double standing in the expectations of men and women.
She would not preferably have very much education, because husbands don't want intelligent wives. They want pretty wives, pliable wives, wives who just do as they're told and produce heirs. She had to present a nice exterior, but above all, she would be a virgin. She mustn't have any kind of a reputation at all.
Any hint of sexual impropriety or indiscretion will be viewed very, very dimly.
Men, on the other hand, were free to enjoy sexual freedom, to sort of sow their oats before marriage.
And for an aristocratic gentleman like our Mr. Banfield and his peers, if they wished to sow their oats discreetly, they could leave Britain behind and embark on the Grand Tour. A mammoth journey across Europe, visiting the biggest and brightest capitals and cultural hotspots that the continent had to offer.
The Grand Tour was like a sort of gap year that could last 2, maybe even 3 years.
There's such an obvious parallel with the backpackers of today. You would leave university or you would finish school and go and sow your wild oats away from home for a number of years before returning and embarking upon a more sensible life.
It was really available to aristocrats. You had to be very rich to do this. It's not like now when you can get an easy jet over to Magaluf for less than 50 quid.
It was done on an astonishing budget. So we're talking, if we're thinking modern equivalent, something approaching £1 million. You would have your portrait painted in Italy by a famous Italian artist.
Learn fencing, perhaps practice their dancing, go to museums and churches.
You would buy some artefacts from an ancient Greek or an ancient Roman site.
The idea was that you would be intellectually enriched by this, that you would see other cultures, you become a better person, and I suppose the small print to that is, and you'll get your rocks off.
You just kept slightly quiet about that, but you were expected to get experience, in inverted commas.
And then come home, often laden down with fake antiques and often a nasty little rash that they'd picked up in Venice.
You would come back with significantly less money, but significantly more stories than when you departed.
And when nobles like Mr. Banfield and his ilk had grown tired of trying to exhaust their family's fortunes by deflowering most of Europe, they returned home to meet Britain's debutantes, like the prim and proper Miss Harding, who'd been rigorously preparing for the season.
All her education would be in learning how to dance, maybe speaking a little French. She would have had to learn how to play the piano a little bit. It was just to get that husband.
With young girls prepped, primed and pruned for success, and young wealthy beaux suitably experienced to tackle married life, it was time for the season to begin. Chapter 2. The Season Begins. What we now think of as the season was officially started in 1780 by mad King George III, when he threw a ball in honour of his wife Queen Charlotte. It was such a success that the season continued until 1958, when the now Queen Elizabeth II abolished the practice. It's believed the Duke of Edinburgh thought the whole thing was, quote, bloody daft. But in Georgian Britain, a good first season could make or break a family, like our social climbing Hardings.
Terribly important to have a good first season, and you hoped you would only have one. You didn't want to return for a second or a third or a fourth. That was absolute social disaster.
And the biggest event of the season would be the official start, the Queen's Ball, where noble and aspiring families at the time would present their daughters to Queen Charlotte, while she stood next to a giant birthday cake.
Queen Charlotte was a minor German princess brought over to marry George III in 1761, and due to his frequent bouts of madness, often was left with a significant amount of responsibility for the British monarchy.
The proceeding would start at around 10 a.m, where young debutantes and their sponsors would queue up to meet the Queen.
Now remember how important this is, my dear.
I will.
Not just for you,
and for all of us.
She would be introduced to the Queen, she would make her curtsey, and then she would disappear, basically. Your first impression was absolutely essential. To present yourself as elegant. If she was very, very fortunate, the Queen might say something nice to her.
But Queen Charlotte enjoyed more than just the formalities of the season. She also enjoyed the gossip.
Gossip was the one currency that everyone shared. I think there's always been that sort of fascination in what your betters, what they get up to.
And luckily for them, the recently invented steam press allowed for the publication of cheap printed material that appealed to the masses.
So what today we might call the gutter press first starts to emerge during this period.
It was not just a way of entertainment. Gossip was a way of finding out who was a good match, who was not a good match, for finding out really what was going on within a family. The things that people were trying to suppress and keep secret. Has someone got a disease? Is someone actually in debt?
A lot of people were interested from a purely social and gossiping type of viewpoint. Who was likely to marry, who wasn't likely to marry, who had a face like a horse, who was extremely pretty. So there was an awful lot of chit-chat going on the whole time. It was quite a brutal time.
It might be a good way of creating scandal, dropping hints and espionage in there in order to ruin or tarnish or reduce the status of someone who is much fancied at the time.
As printing in this period became cheaper and cheaper, it opened it up to a variety of more and more risque material.
As all technology and all human innovation, I'm sure it was first invented for very illustrious purposes, but it's not very long before somebody comes along and thinks, I know what we can do with that. And pornographic literature is absolutely no different.
In terms of novels, you have the novel Fanny Hill, which is the story of a woman of pleasure.
Fanny Hill is often regarded as the first erotic novel, which is really where we think the euphemism Fanny for the vulva actually came from. That's how influential this book is.
And when there were 2 earthquakes felt in London in 1750, the Bishop of London stood up in the pulpit and said he knew what was causing earthquakes. It was the publication of Fanny Hill.
If you look at the cartoons of the time, they are remarkably frank about female lust. There's a famous British cartoon called The Farewell, where a woman bids farewell to her partner, a sailor, through a window with her handkerchief, but beneath the windowsill she is making love to another man.
British pornography was ribald, rude, cheeky.
So it's very much in the spirit of Carry On or Benny Hill. Compared to work on the continent, the erotica produced in Britain is something that even to our modern eyes today looks incredibly, hilariously even British.
But then you've also got the Marquis de Sade, and he was on the continent. And if you think that people of the past can't be shocking with their sexuality, or if they weren't absolute dirtbags, then just read some of the Marquis de Sade's work, and it will still shock today. It's got the power to still do that. And not in a good way, not in a kind of, oh, that's rather saucy, in a kind of, it's not very nice at all.
Whether it be the cheeky titillation of British pornography or the more graphic material available from the continent, aristocratic men consumed pornography that showed women enjoying sex and being the instigators of sexual encounters. Even young ladies like Miss Harding would manage to get hold of some salacious material. But their first sanctioned interaction with the opposite sex would be at the first ball of the season. Chapter 3. Dances and Debauchery. The season consisted of dinner parties and theatre trips, but the one event that merits the most lavish preparation and feverish gossip was that of the social balls. This is the moment when our sheltered Miss Harding officially meets the caddish Mr. Banfield, and the sexual tension is electric.
The balls were where you were able to see your suitor, your potential match, flirt with them in a respectable way, but probably also check out their form, their movement, their grace, their style, their figures.
Miss Harding.
Mr. Banfield.
shall we?
Of course.
For an experienced young man, the balls might have been a bit tame. But for a young woman, this moment was often transformative.
The first time you might actually touch a member of the opposite sex was during the dancing. This is why dancing is so important, because it really was the preamble to courtship.
For the debutante, this is the moment in which this carefully cloistered life and separation and carefully managed interaction with men, this is the moment when it's broken.
The etiquette for dancing was, if you were invited by a gentleman to dance, he would fill in your dance card, so you were booked, as it were. A dance card that was full, that was good news. A dance card that was half empty, that was very bad news. Worse even than having an empty dance card was sitting as a wallflower on the benches without anybody coming to ask you to dance. If you were invited to dance by a man, then it was foolish to decline. You had to have a very good reason.
May I have this dance?
My ankle.
You've hurt your ankle, you're tired, you're going to sit out. It didn't mean that you couldn't dance for the rest of the evening.
But your ankle.
It feels better now.
Whilst at the ball, our Mr. Banfield behaves in a proper manner, using his smouldering looks to make our debutante, Miss Harding, fall in love with him. But when the ball came to an end and the ladies had been safely returned to their homes, the night was just beginning.
Obviously, you would go to the social balls and you would behave yourself. But once you're done with that, if you wanted to go somewhere to have a bit more fun, there was lots of places that you could go to. There were brothels all over the place, and that's where you would go to enjoy yourself, to empty your wallet.
It was totally in your face, wherever you went, particularly in the areas around Covent Garden.
With his sister safely returned home, reputation intact, young men like Mr. Harding would then head out to the many brothels of London. And knowing which ones to visit was made easier by the publication of one book in 1758, Jack Harris's List.
Obviously, there's no internet, there is no Googleable place, where do I go? There's no Georgian Pornhub for this, but there were guides to the city available, brothel guides.
And the idea was, with this sort of A to Z of whores, is that people could actually know in advance the age, the description, and the particular speciality of the girl concerned.
This would be the guide that all of the aristocrats, all of the swells would take, and if you could go the Georgian equivalent of viral, that could make your business. So getting in this book was a big deal.
Harris's List may have been a way to pre-select a woman to spend the night with, but some prostitutes had their own way of screening their clientele.
Size seems to have been of some consequence. Certainly there was a woman in Harris's List, a Miss Corbett. This is what Harris has to say in regard to price. She has one fixed rule. She always measures a gentleman's maypole by a standard of 9 inches and expects a guinea for every inch it is short of full measure.
And while aristocratic gents like Mr. Banfield were busy putting it about in the evening, during the day, his energies are focused on securing our wealthy young debutante for his wife. Chapter 4. It's a date. One of the fondest pleasures of the era was watching young love blossom between two of society's most eligible. But as always during the period, a myriad of rules had to be adhered to after a first meeting at the ball.
Well, what you hope is that they will do the polite thing and come and visit you the following morning to see that you're all right and to make it plain that he would very much appreciate meeting again. You stayed for a minimum of 15 minutes to indicate that this was the social call.
But not any young man could invite a lady on a social outing. Only those with a title need bother calling on Miss Harding.
Usually the families would know something about most of the young men that a girl was going to meet. They would have some background information, and somebody that they didn't know they would find out about before the girl was allowed to see him again.
With his title in tow, Mr. Banfield has passed the first hurdle and will be allowed to officially court Miss Harding, but this was still very much controlled. The role of protecting a young girl's innocence was one of great responsibility, and in the absence of a suitable lady, this task has been entrusted to Miss Harding's elder brother, Edward.
The right person for a chaperone, the person that would allow access, but at the same time guard a young woman against exploitation, would be someone who had already experienced the scene, know what it's about, know the risks, know that what a good suitor was, but also, in a sense, protect a young woman from an unhealthy situation in terms of her reputation.
But alas, if history has taught us anything, it's that a young lustful heart cannot easily be tamed. And a brief lapse in their chaperone's attention allows our young sweethearts to share a moment of flirtation and intimacy. But other courting couples took much bigger and dangerous risks, and the reputation of a family of good standing for centuries could be brought to tatters for the sake of a fleeting fumble.
At its worst, it would be pregnancy, which would then require a woman to leave the scene.
The fallout from a pregnancy would be dealt with very differently, depending on whether you are male or female, rich or poor.
Getting pregnant when you're not married was not good.
If you didn't have that money, you were in a lot of trouble. You were in a lot of trouble. If you had a job, if you were a maid in a household, you'd almost certainly lose your job.
And unfortunately, for those girls in service, if your pregnancy had the potential to ruin a social climbing family like our Hardings, you would be to blame no matter the circumstances.
The life of a domestic servant in an aristocratic household would completely depend upon the nature of your master. If you had a lecherous, unpleasant, sexually aggressive master, your life could be horrendous.
Men really did reckon that the world was there for their benefit.
You were deemed their property, and if you bore them a child, then that was entirely acceptable behaviour on his part, and something that your family more likely would have to deal with.
Often women were blamed for becoming pregnant, so that young woman was most likely to be dismissed from service, not only because she might be seen as the provocator, but also because she was an embarrassment to the family.
This is my house, and I'll be dead and buried before I see it filled with the bastard children of some servant girl's accursed womb. Get out! Get out!
For aristocratic families whose daughters had been deflowered by a gentleman, pressure could be piled on for a quick wedding.
Probably the best that you could hope for is that you're pregnant with your betrothed's baby, and that there can just be a very quick wedding, and then you can both go, I know, it's so weird, but I gave birth after only 4 months of pregnancy, and move on.
Happily, these sordid events were the thing of scandal and not the norm. But even good girls like Miss Harding in the flush of young love could be foolhardy.
A scandal could be that you unfortunately sat out with a young man where you couldn't be seen. Sounds pathetic, but that was frowned on. To be caught in a kissing situation or in a hugging situation was death. That was your social situation right down the pan.
Luckily for our debutante, her brief indiscretion is not discovered, and Mr. Banfield is ready to take the next step. Chapter 5. We have a match.
Miss Harding.
Mr. Banfield.
With young love in full bloom, Mr. Banfield would make more regular calls on his intended, stealing moments of privacy in her opulent family home.
I'd imagine a woman of your talents is always busy. I'm lucky to have you to myself at all.
I don't think luck has anything to do with it.
I'm grateful all the same.
Until next time, Mr. Banfield.
Over the months of the season, Miss Harding has had a flurry of engagement offers from many rich and influential suitors. But her wealthy father is only interested in a husband who comes with a title.
Georgian society was extremely hierarchical and structured. You have the royal family at the top and then the royal dukes just below them. Then you have the aristocracy, which is about 500 noble families. And then below them you have the gentry, and that may be some 10,000 people. And then below them you have the merchants, you have the businessmen.
At the very top of the tree for the period was its namesake, George for Georgian and Prince Regent for Regency. His mother, Queen Charlotte, may have been the focus of the season as we know it, but the apple fell far from the tree, as he was the most roguish king to ever sit on the British throne.
George IV was a gorgeous young man, as a young man, very, very attractive, a real connoisseur of the arts, a ladies' man. He then, I'm afraid, became rather debauched.
He was a real playboy prince, really enjoyed life on the town, and he had a succession of mistresses, and everyone put up with that, by and large.
Like our Mr. Banfield, George IV knew firsthand that marriages were all about money, having been forced by Parliament to marry Princess Caroline Braunschweig, or Brunswick to the English ear, before they agreed to pay off his substantial debts, which amounted to more than £82 million in today's money.
He spent one night with her, which resulted in one child, and he then refused to ever see her again.
He was spending huge sums of money on the most ridiculous entertainments, which very often ended in chaos, as food was hurled around and ladies were half-dressed, shall we say.
His own Prime Minister records that George IV eats a pigeon and beef pie, he drinks most of a bottle of white wine, he follows this up with champagne, brandy, port, and then has a dose of laudanum to ease his digestion. And almost as an aside, the Duke of Wellington mentions that the meal in question was breakfast.
When he died, I think it was the Times newspaper that said there never was a man more despised by his fellow human beings than this dead king, which is quite an obituary.
George's low standing in public opinion may have had less to do with his actions and more with the social structures of Britain that were being overhauled. The Industrial Revolution made some once poor families, like the Hardings, into some of the wealthiest in the country. But to be fully accepted into society, their daughters had to marry into the landed gentry.
People could get immensely rich, especially if they had land with coal, and therefore his children would be very marriageable.
What happens in the Georgian period is the growth of a middle class. Of course, this new class of people who are not property owners formally are now moving into this and looking for an opportunity to change the fortunes, participate in the fortunes of the country that they live in.
One of the things that really gives the flavour to the Regency period and to the late Georgian period is the Industrial Revolution. And with the Industrial Revolution rises this new class of industrialists, a mercantile elite whose wealth does equal that of the aristocracy. And this new class are absolutely a threat to the English aristocracy.
If you were in trade, you were not considered to be a gentleman, and your family would not be considered ladies and gentlemen. You could marry somebody socially beneath you, if that socially beneath was rich.
The aristocracy have a troubled relationship with the new money. The gambling, womanising ways of the aristocracy means they often lose a fortune in a generation and have to replenish their coffers by marrying into these classes that they deem below them.
Marriage was a way of breaking those kind of barriers to class mobility. It was a way in which an aristocrat of lesser status could move to the heights of the aristocratic class through marriage.
engagements of the time were seen more like a business deal, with each party getting something different out of the marriage contract. Our Mr. Harding wants his daughter to give birth to the future Lord Banfield, and Mr. Banfield wants to get his hands on some of his future father-in-law's industry-made fortune.
So we're assuming that it's gone well, the families have approved. The next stage is for the young man to go to the father, the girl's father, and say, I would like to marry your daughter. May I pay my addresses to her? And his financial situation would then be scrutinised by Papa.
I'm curious to know the origins of your fortune
My family have a long-standing run with money.
and your recreational activities. Gambling. Are you a man that gambles excessively?
I do flutter around in those crowds,
Yes.
but in every other aspect of my life I am discreet, of course.
And if it was found satisfactory, then he would say, yes, dear boy, you may go and ask my daughter for her hand because I have given you my permission.
With Mr. Harding's permission granted, there is now the matter of him giving a substantial dowry to Mr. Banfield to seal the deal. This was an arrangement on a young lady's future, on which she had no say.
The moment that they married, their property and any earnings that they had would directly become the property of their husband.
As a wise man once said, there is no easier way to rob a lady of her fortune by way of marriage.
The sad reality for many members of the aristocracy was that marriages were in fact a cynical combination of convenience and money.
Chapter 6. Here Comes the Bride. Weddings may have been the climax of the season, and all society would have known about the final pairings. But unless you were a royal, the actual marriage ceremony would be a much smaller affair than you might expect. The ceremonies were limited to immediate family only. But of course, the most important part of the marriage day for Georgian couples is not the wedding, but the marriage night, when for an honourable young lady, a lifetime of sexual tension could finally be released.
Okay, so you are a young debutante, you've bagged your husband, you played a blinder, well done. Here he is. Now the wedding night.
Mothers wouldn't say anything very much, except you've got to think of England and try to be brave. There would be no real gynecological details of any kind, so she might be incredibly innocent and ignorant.
Miss Harding may have been an unplucked flower, but that wasn't the case for all aristocratic young brides.
It would be very naive to think that all good girls went into marriage and had no sexual experience whatsoever.
Of course, many of the women would have had some sexual experience before, but they would have been very discreet about it.
Whatever she'd been exposed to had to convey enough of a sense of innocence.
For a Georgian aristocrat, the moral probity of their potential wife was of paramount importance.
Your husband needs to think that you've had no sexual experience whatsoever. So on a kind of, an introductory level to this, I suppose you just pretend you didn't enjoy it too much, maybe go, ooh, ow, at the right times. Georgian Britain firmly believed the hymen was the gold standard virginity test, so you would need to figure out ways to be able to produce blood. And the way they get away with this is they take a sponge that's soaked in blood, in pig's blood, and before they have sex, they will insert it into the woman's vagina, which the fellow will be none the wiser about. And then at the point of penetration, you just make a big show and dance about, oh, it's just so big. And then you'll bleed. And then you can fake it all that way, and this is supposedly proof.
After the honeymoon period, the newlyweds are now getting on with a normal Georgian marriage. While the new Mrs. Banfield gossips about married life with her friends, her husband has his own social circles to attend to.
Men were encouraged to socialise with other men, and that was often the way in which they could become more worldly. And London and Britain more generally was awash with these different gentlemen clubs.
These clubs, there are places where very, very aristocratic men could go to walk on the wild side, and George IV was apparently a member.
These were not brothels, but these were spaces where men would engage in frank conversation, perhaps as a prelude to entering into a world of sexual experimentation.
Legend would have you believe that at these clubs where very, very aristocratic men would meet and indulge in behaviour and orgies that would make Guns N' Roses look like the Jonas Brothers.
Under the Cyclops Eye?
Under the Cyclops Eye.
Some of the initiation rituals have gone down in history.
The Beggars' Benisons Club was a Scottish club based in Fife. It had a curious initiation ceremony.
Their initiation involved a silver platter that the members would masturbate onto and then would pass round.
A sort of wankers club. Went down very well in Scotland. They tried it in England, but it didn't catch on.
The infamous Hellfire clubs, which existed around Britain, were shrouded in secrecy and got up to all sorts of horrendous behaviour. There were stories of satanic rituals and of orgies taking place.
What happened in these clubs is now a matter of intense debate. Was it legend? Did it actually happen?
Whatever married men did or didn't get up to at these clubs was their affair, but society expected them to fulfil one duty. Chapter 7. An Heir and a Spare. For the aristocracy, the season was not about love. For Mr. Banfield, it was about getting money now. For Mr. Harding, it was about producing a titled heir to pass his wealth on to.
That was the important thing, finding a woman who would produce an heir, preferably an heir and a spare, which still holds good, actually. If you were a woman of substance with a husband who required an heir, then you would have an accoucheur, a male midwife. And this was absolutely essential if you were going to give birth to a live son.
And while women like the now Lady Banfield were at home having babies and running the household, their husbands would think nothing of taking up with another woman.
It was a time of extraordinary double standards and hypocrisy. It was quite proper that they should sleep around. Utterly wrong for women to be promiscuous.
Wealthy men were expected to take mistresses. That was absolutely normal and part of the course. The role of the professional mistress or the kept woman is one that goes back centuries, and even though they're doing pretty much the same job as the women in the brothels, they are viewed very, very differently.
You know I can get you anything you want. What about a new dress?
I've got lots of lovely dresses.
A ring. What about a ring?
Stop it.
What about a house?
Having a mistress was very often something that got you away from a wife who might be difficult.
Not now, Philip.
The wife was there to produce the heir. The question of sex you would look elsewhere for. It was almost expected a man would be wanting to have a mistress.
Very often it was simply because she was convenient, she was always available. She might also be a good companion.
We should get married.
What, you think I'd make a good Lady Banfield?
Most certainly. Or we could elope, marry in secret.
That is not to say that aristocratic men didn't fall in love with their concubines, their mistresses, but because their family reputation, it would be class suicide, economic suicide, to follow the train of that passion.
The thing about being a mistress was you had a much better deal. If you were doing well and had a good protector, you had a much better life than a wife. A wife, as soon as she was married, every penny that she had went to her husband. She had no rights of any description. But a mistress was in charge of her own financial situation. She could have her own property, her own servants. If she was clever and a little bit lucky, she had a much better life overall.
On the one hand, the mistress enjoyed enormous prestige. She was very visible, but she would never be accepted into the dining rooms of the homes of the men that she was consorting with.
It was always with this looming sense, this nervous anxiety that your time as a mistress to a member of the aristocracy could be cut short. The image that would haunt mistresses of the Georgian period would be the older ladies of Covent Garden on the street who are selling their wares, having once been a high society mistress and having then been reduced to the fate of a common street prostitute.
But history does tell a few tales of mistresses who managed to make it all the way to the top.
So if you were a sex worker in Georgian London, there was a slim chance that you could shag your way to the top and make a lot of money, and that did happen to some people. Women could access extremely wealthy patrons and become really important and influential themselves.
I think one of the most remarkable lives of the Georgian period is Lady Hamilton.
Born in abject poverty, but very, very pretty.
Due to her remarkable beauty, was picked up to be an artist's muse, and this obviously caught the attention of aristocratic men of the period.
Having been a prostitute to being a respectable man's mistress, she became the mistress of Sir William Hamilton, who married her.
So she went from daughter of a single mother in Cheshire to being the ambassador's wife, Lady Hamilton, in Naples over the course of one lifetime.
She did incredibly well.
While it was the duty for Lord Banfield to find a wife, he was expected to take up a mistress. But for some husbands, mistresses did not fulfill their lustful and romantic desires. These men escaped to the many molly houses that existed throughout London.
Molly houses were spaces which men frequented in order to enjoy homosexual sex. A molly, be a man who dressed as a woman, the madam, the brothel keeper, often would dress as a woman, but there were 30 in London alone.
It wasn't strictly a gay brothel. It was a meeting place where men who wanted to have sex with other men could go and do that. So it's half cruising, it's half brothel. There was certainly sex for sale there, but these were sort of like safe spaces around the city.
For other gay men of the period, homosexual relationships came at a cost.
In the early 18th century, men were still being hung for the crime of sodomy. So it's extremely dangerous in a way that heterosexual brothels are not.
The question of the legality of homosexuality is less of whether it was legal, but whether it was tolerated.
Class comes into this enormously. All the men who were executed in Georgian London for sodomy were middle to working class. They were poor. If you were loaded, you had a lot more sexual license.
Male homosexuality is well documented throughout the period, with the works of gay writers like Byron, but far less is known about female homosexuality.
I would assume that the lack of documentary evidence about female homosexuality during the period is not because of its lack of existence, but just because it was less likely that women would record it and would leave those historical records for us to read. However, in the late Georgian period, in the Regency period, there are a few standout examples, fascinating examples of female homosexuality. You have the ladies of Llangollen.
And what's really fascinating about them is not that lesbians existed in the 18th century, we know that, but they were objects of fascination.
Tourists from all over the UK, but people from the continent, from Europe, would come and visit them to find out more about this extraordinary relationship that they were pursuing.
They were well liked. Queen Charlotte found them absolutely fascinating. Fascinating enough for them to have got a royal pension to live on. So that tells us a lot of things about attitudes to lesbianism and homosexuality. On one hand, in London, they could be hanging men for the crime of sodomy, but then in Wales, the king's going, "Oh, aren't you cute? Have a pension."
While Lord Banfield continues to see his mistress, some married men embarked on homosexual relationships, and occasionally aristocratic women took up lesbian affairs. But what, I hear you ask, has become of our good Lady Banfield, who just a few years before was the favourite debutante of the season?
For the aristocracy, once a woman had produced a male heir, and perhaps a spare as well, she might well be allowed to live a fairly independent life, as long as she was fairly discreet about it.
The same went for the husband. So it was a thing that was understood and accepted. It was quite a tacit understanding between a married couple.
Women were having affairs aplenty. Of course they were. Of course they were.
The Georgians had a reasonably relaxed attitude towards extramarital affairs. If you have a cynical view of marriage, if you do not entertain the notion that it should be a love match, you can permit people to find emotional and sexual satisfaction elsewhere. And that went for men and women.
And so there you have it, my dear viewer. In Georgian Britain, if you were a rich aristocratic woman like Lady Banfield, and you were lucky, once you were married and had produced an heir, your sex life really began.
We often look at the 1960s as the start of the sexual revolution, the explosion of sexual awareness. Actually, the Georgian period, hundreds of years earlier, was the start of a sexual awakening in Britain.
It certainly still resonates, doesn't it? It was I think it was a very elegant time, a time of great change, and their lives aren't that different to our own nowadays.
It was such a mixture. It was a period where there was so much you could do if you were in the right position, and so much, on the other hand, that you couldn't do.
That transition from the wild, frolicking, devil-may-care Georgians to the more straight-laced, morally careful Regency period, I think creates a lot of the drama and a lot of the interest.
On one hand, you've got very much your Jane Austen, Elizabeth Bennet, very, very prim and proper. And on the other hand, you've got all these people with their bloomers down, having an absolute whale of a time. And I think that's what I love about them, is this huge tension in this period, is they enjoy sex, they want to have sex, but just keep it quiet when you're doing it.
It was a time of gentle romance and salacious scandal, a time of poverty and absolute wealth, a time of sex and sensibility.